This is the seventh time that we're discussing this beautiful composition of Shankaracharya. And so far, we have completed only 17 verses in the first six sessions. We started with one powerful message which came out spontaneously from the mouths of Adi Shankaracharya when he saw an old Pandit repeating aphorisms of grammarian Panini day in and day out at his doorsteps instead of taking the necessary steps to seek enlightenment before the death arrived. He followed that with 12 additional beautiful verses wherein he described, summarized the wisdom of the entire Vedanta. He noted that the human beings were deeply rooted in material wealth and sensual pleasures rather than being prayerful and spiritual. He emphasized the need to create in our mind inspiring thoughts of reality and divinity, Sadbuddhim, and recommended us to contemplate upon Govinda, Brahman by any name. Shankaracharya indicated that our relationships in our daily life are merely the roles that we play. But while we are playing those roles, he's indicated that there must be love, there must be charity, there must be compassion, and then always be service of others. He emphasized that even though these family relationships are absolutely important and essential, he emphasized that they should not be pursued to the total exclusion of fulfilling all the four essential goals of human beings, four purusharthas, including the moksha. Last session, we studied four verses which were composed by his disciples, starting with the first of the four premier disciples was disciple Padmapad, who started with the verse which emphasized renunciation is rather difficult without true understanding. He went on to say, the verse goes like this: Jatilo mundi lunchita kesha, kasha yambara bhukruta vesha, pashyannapina pashyati mudo, yudara nimittam bhukruta vesha. He said, was critically talking about individuals who disguise as renunciates without any proper mental preparation and scriptural studies under the guidance of a spiritual guru. Such individuals have no clarity of the vision to see the divinity. The hairdos and dresses that they wear are simply disguises to gain a prominent role in the society and simply to not fulfill, simply to fill their stomachs on the generosity of the kind devotees. He described them as Pashyadnapi, no Pashyati Mura. These are the people who indeed know what they need to be doing as renunciates, but just do not follow their vows and do not carry out their responsibilities. They indeed, he indicated, were charlatans misusing the privileges offered to the sannyasi. The next verse was another premier disciple of Shankaracharya, Todakacharya. And the subject matter is the desires, unfortunately, do not relent even at an old age. He said, Angam galitam palitam mundam, dashana vihinam jatam tundam, bruddho yati gruhitva dandam, tadapi na munchati asha pindam. What he was saying is maturity must arrive as we grow up and reach the old age. He was describing this man who is leaning on his wooden staff because he's unable to carry his own weight, but still seemed to carry a tremendous burden on his head. What is the burden? A variety of desires, expectations, hopes, and cravings, instead of developing emotional maturity, which means becoming free of dependence and intense attachments. One can develop inner composure and cheerfulness, as Shankaracharya had indicated earlier, by being in good company and learning from the enlightened individuals, by being more prayerful and thoughtful, by more sharing and giving. And if you remember, his roadmap was being in good company. By satsanga, you develop detachment with sangatvam. Through that process, you are no longer deluded, nirmohatvam. And when you are no longer deluded, you understand what is right from wrong. You are able to understand what the scriptures say. So you understand to learn and know the Nishchala Tattvam. That was a step-by-step suggestion that Shankaracharya did. The third verse was another brilliant disciple of Shankaracharya, Hastamalaka, who says that news of desire does not spare even the renunciates, trying to emphasizing just because you renunciate doesn't mean that you are not desirous of other things that you should not be desirous of. He said, Agre vande pushte bhanu, ratrau, chubuk samarjita janu, karatala bhikshas tarutala vasa, tadapina munjati asha pasha. He's describing the mental status of an individual in the cold winters of Minnesota, who's given up his role as a householder and is doing a penance in the elements, but without any mental preparation or the true understanding, which is absolutely essential as an renunciate. He's describing those who are ostensibly practice ascetics, but in fact are mentally spending themselves in sensuous self-dissipations as hypocrites, just as Lord Sri Krishna has described them. The one who, controlling the organs of action, sits with the mind remembering those very sense objects, Sri Krishna said, is deluded and is called a person of false conduct or hypocrite. If you remember in the 3rd chapter, 6th verse, karmendriyani sanyamya yaste manasasmaran indriyarthar vimudatma mithyacharas sauchyate. The last verse we studied last time was sung by his disciple Subodha, who said that no one can gain moksha or freedom without gaining the knowledge of Brahman. He said, Kurute Ganga Sagara Gamanam, Vrata Parana Mathavadanam, Jnana Vihina Sarvamatena, Bhajati Namuktim Janmashatena. One can go on pilgrimage where the sacred Ganges is, or where she meets ocean, Kurute Ganga Sagaram, or observe vows or distribute gifts of charity. But if that individual is devoid of first-hand experience of the truth, jnana vihina, does not get liberated even through going through 100 life cycles as a human being. And this is not only one person's opinion. He says all schools of thoughts, sarva matena. Again, he's extending here the theme of poorly conceived penance of a human being who has yet to receive the true knowledge of reality, the Brahman. Going on pilgrimage, giving money on charity, or doing a penance are all good and worthwhile, but without reaching the ultimate goal of getting the knowledge of Brahman from an enlightened teacher, one cannot gain moksha or true freedom even after going through 100 human birth cycles. The key for us is to recognize the goal-oriented human beings. They're called Kashit Dhiraha, who want to see the self, Pratyagatma Aikshat, must withdraw their attention from the usual activities in the pursuit of material wealth if they really want to understand Brahman and gain that immortality. However, as they withdraw, they must not become isolated as sansaris as we are. Their relationship with the world simply must change. Instead of being relationship of exploiting, that relationship becomes that of giving. It is a relationship of worship. They both acquire an abiding mind, a mind with utmost faith or shraddha. The shraddha is not a blind faith, but instead utmost willingness to advance their studies till their goal is reached through personal conviction. They maintain a positive outlook, meaning they have shraddha and absolute confidence, utmost sincerity to pursue the God with intense longing to gain the knowledge of Brahman. Just do not give up. Be persistent, like Dhruva was, or as Markandeya was. That is what we studied last time when we met. Today I plan to review about 4 verses. This is the 18th verse. It goes like this. Sura Mandira Tarumula Nivasa Shaya Bhutala Majinavasa Shaya Bhutalam Ajinam Vasa Sarva Paritraga Bhogatyaga Kasya Sukham Karoti Vigraga Bhajagovindam Bhajagovindam. Sura Mandira Tarumula Nivasa. It means sheltering under some tree, Tarumula Nivasa, in the vicinity of a sacred temple, Sura Mandira. Shaya Bhutala Ajinam Vasa, sleeping on the open ground, wearing the deer skin as the clothes, Ajinam Vasa. Sarva Parigraha Bhogatyaga, completely renouncing the thirst to enjoy all kinds of material possessions. And if you are a true renunciate, Kasya Sukham Karoti Viraga, a person like this, who understands it, who would not find the true and everlasting happiness with this kind of dispassion. Who wrote this verse? It was sung by another premium disciple of Shankaracharya, Sureshwara. It is considered that his original name was Mandan Mishra, initially disciple of Kumarila Bhatt. However, he was summarily defeated by Shankaracharya in the philosophical debate, which lasted over several days. Something important to remember, now that we have a female vice president of the country, that the debate was refereed by a woman that was his own wife, Mandan Mishra's wife. Her name was Ubhay Bharati. Mm-hmm. That means if your referee is a woman, that means that individual knows better than both the individuals who are debating. After Mandan Mishra accepted the defeat, he accepted it with grace. That sometimes is difficult for the people who lose. He became a sannyasi and became a disciple of Sri Shankaracharya. As a matter of fact, he was ultimately given the responsibility to head the spiritual center of Benares, Kashrangeri Mutt. Only question that is raised by recent day scholars is whether this Mandan Mishra that we're discussing, the Sureshwara, was the same author of Brahma Siddhi. I don't know the answer. Maybe somebody can comment at the end of the discussion. This verse is painting a real picture of a wise man, ascetic, a true renunciate who is truly happy as an individual. How is he described as? He has no possessions. He does not have a house, wanders from place to place. He either lives in the temple, around the temple, or near the temple, under the tree. This wise individual is happy being by himself. Earth is his bed. His clothes tend to be simple. He was an animal skin, ajinam. and is quite happy with it. A couple of things to remember. In reality, we as human beings have really everything with us. We do not require anything to be happy. But if you just look around, the so-called successful and powerful individuals tend to be unhappy all the time, and then that's the reason why they ever remain greedy. I mean, look at it this way. If you look at the emperors, they're always concerned about an imagined uprising, attacked by a nearby or distant king, and maybe I'll lose the war and lose the entire kingdom or maybe part of the kingdom. Dictators these days worry about being deposed or being murdered. The rich are worried about their investments and the stocks on the Wall Street. The politicians are worried about losing their re-elections. The powerful are worried about holding on to the exalted positions. Men and women, despite their great accomplishments, are frequently envious of others whom they perceive to have greater accomplishments and prestigious stature in the community. Yes, true. The fact is, grass seems to always look greener on the other side if you don't look at it carefully. But the person who has understood what Brahman is, what his own true identity is, these individuals are in a perpetual state of bliss. They are at peace and ever engrossed in the service of others. They recognize they have everything that anyone can dream of, and they need absolutely nothing more. You know what? If you look at a typical American, in order to be happy, he needs a big mansion with 6 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, 3-car garages. He needs a special bed with a specific sleep number to be comfortable at night. They do not. This person who understands his own identity does not require designer clothes, very comfortable with the deer skin. Such individuals have given up every binding desire to be happy in himself, in oneself, with oneself alone. The quality described in Sita Prajna in the 2nd chapter. Jahati yada kaman sarvan partha manogatan atmanyev atmanatishta Sita Prajnasya doshita. So we said reality, we do not require anything to be happy. We already have it. And since we are talking about renunciate, dispassion is not an action. Dispassion is just a disposition of mind. Dispassion arises out of the healthy perception of the objects of the world. And in that context, he is describing a person who has that understanding finds an everlasting happiness like this renunciate. Kasya sukham karoti viraga. Important to remember for all of us that dispassion always brings happiness. There tends to be unhappiness where there is passion. Let's look at our daily life. We erroneously think that happiness comes from whatever we may be doing at that time, such as eating good food, watching a good movie, receiving a special gift. In truth, the happiness comes because during these moments, the mind becomes free from any kind of passion. From all raga deshas, you're away. What the objects of the world are able to do momentarily is release the mind from raga dvesha. That means at that particular moment, the mind is so quiet, it does not want anything else. So what really shows out is the true inner nature of ourselves. And that is at peace and entirely happy. And what we enjoy in that state, when I mentioned, is the viraga. One more thing to comment about is, very often people erroneously equate vairagya means with aversion. But aversion is not vairagya. Aversion is only another form of attachment. A distorted attachment is aversion. last point to make or emphasize is Vairagya does not mean one does not like anything. Vairagya means that one is neither attached or averse to anything. So it's a disposition of mind. Again, something for us to remember as samsaris, this dispassion is not restricted to sannyasi only. Even as a samsari householder, having gained the knowledge of our own identity and our relationship with Brahman, samsari knows that he really needs absolutely nothing. And we'll discuss this topic a little further down the road. The next verse is written, which goes like this. Nityananda wrote it. It says, Yogaratova Bhogaratova Sangaratova Sangavihina Yasa Brahmani Ramate Chittam Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva Bhajagovindam Bhajagovindam. One who revels in yoga, yogurato, va means or the one who revels in bhoga, meaning pleasures, bhogarato. One who seeks enjoyment in company, sangarato. And one who revels in solitude away from the crowd is sangavihina. Yassa brahmani ramate chittam, that means whose mind revels in Brahman, that individual is satisfied, happy, and rejoices. Nandati, nandati, nandatyeva. To translate it in one phrase, let one revel in yoga, let them revel in bhoga. Let one seek enjoyment in the company, or let them revel in the solitude away from the crowd. But he whose mind revels in Brahman, he alone enjoys, seek Govinda. As I mentioned, it is the verse attributed to Nityananda, who was always in such state of ecstasy. He glorifies the state of realization of Brahman as conceived by the scriptures. To one who was awakened to this wisdom, it is immaterial whether he is in crowd or living alone in solitude, whether he is in yoga or bhoga. In whatever condition he may live, his is a real joy, and that can be seen on his face, on his body language. In that enlightened state, nothing else pleases him. No worldly things are desired for self or sense gratification. If you remember the pictures of Ramakrishna Paramahamsa many times, that kind of ecstasy you can be seeing in those pictures of his. When the knowledge is gained through one's studies and amplified through the teachings of an enlightened teacher, guru, and then are applied in our daily life, that person succeeds in maturing its intelligence. And finally, that intelligence can lodge in his heart in the form of a wisdom. And this wisdom, when it's integrated, applied in the day-to-day subsequent activities, ultimately leads to true devotion, both to God and the humanity, Janata and Janardana. Thus, the knowledge which has matured is spoken of as devotion. And that devotion ultimately leads to the joy and ecstasy that are manifested on his face. Now, such a man of perfection alone enjoys in this world. He has no sorrows, trials, or tribulations. Such a man of perfection is incapable of acting against moral harmony and ethical goodness of the society. Having realized the self, Atman, he becomes the self in all. Sarva Bhutatma Bhutatma. It is said in Mundaka Upanishad, Brahma Veda, Brahmaiva Bhavati. Such realized sense thereafter lives sporting with the self, reveling with the self, and ever in the service of the world. They're called Atma Krida and Atmarati. Now, a wise person enjoys all three levels of happiness. The ultimate happiness is only for one whose mind dwells upon Brahman, Nandati, Nandati, Nandyatyeva. But there are three levels of happiness, as Lord Sri Krishna described in the 17th verse of the 3rd chapter. He said, Yasmat marati deva syat atmatruptascha manava atmanyeva cha santushta tasya karyam na vidyate. Whereas, for the person who would delight in the self, who's satisfied with the self, contented in the self alone, there is nothing more to be done. Lord Shri Krishna described the wise man as Atmarati, one who revels in himself, and Atmatrupta, who is content in himself. And that person is Atmanyeva Santushta, one who is satisfied. These three levels of happiness can be described in our day-to-day examples as well. To begin with, we are happy when we think of the object that we like. Then we are happier when we acquire that object. And finally, we are the happiest when we enjoy the object. You're going to say, Dr. Sane, give us a specific example of Rati, Santushti, and Trupti. For example, when your loving wife tells you before you go to work that she's going to make a favorite dish for dinner that night, the very idea gives that man happiness all day. So he is Rati, very happy about that. When he gets home and smells that nice fragrance of his favorite dish, his happiness is multiplied many times. So he is Santushta. And finally, when he takes the seat at the dinner table and tastes that tasty dish, his happiness is complete. That is Trupti. In much the same way, a wise man finds contentment in the happiness that he finds within himself. Atma Trupta. One more thing for us to remember. The wisdom that I'm talking about is not related to any particular kind of lifestyle. We know Krishna Bhogi, Shuko Bhogi. It is a starting a bhogi in between. Drupau, Janaka, Raghavo. Karmadnishta Vashishtadhya Sarvete Jnanina Samaha. Lord Sri Krishna enjoyed pleasures. Bhogi. Saint Shuka was ascetic. Shuka, a bhogi. Janaka and Rama were kings. Drupau. And sage Vashishta and others, Vashishtadhya, Vashishta and other Adhya, were devoted to the performance of rituals. And they were, important thing is they're all with the knowledge, wisdom, understanding of their own identity. But at the end, they're all equally wise men. So although the lifestyle of a renunciate be more conducive and suitable for the purpose of pursuing knowledge, it is not essential to renunciate to gain the wisdom. If you remember, again in the 3rd chapter, Lord Sri Krishna offered 2 different roadmaps how to reach the same goal. He said, Lokesmin Dvivida Anishta, Pura Prokta Mayanaga, Jnana Yogena Sankhyanam, Karma Yogena Yogina. O sinless Arjuna, twofold committed lifestyle in the world is told by me in the very beginning. The pursuit of knowledge for renunciates and pursuit of karma yoga for those who pursue activity. Third verse we're going to look at is Bhagavad-Gita, Kinchita Gita, Ganga Jala Lava Kanika Gita, Sukradapi Yena Murari Samarcha, Kriyate Tasya Yamena Charcha. Yena Kinchit Gita, Kinchit Bhagavad-Gita Adhita, by whom even a little bit of Bhagavad-Gita is studied. Kinchidapi Bhagavad-Gita Adhita, by whom even a drop of Ganges water has been sipped Ganga Jala Lava Kanika Gita. One who has worshipped Lord Murari even once with true devotion, Yena Sukrudapi Murari Samarcha. To him, there is never a discussion with the Lord of Death. Kriyate Tasya Yamena Na Charcha. That means not afraid of death anymore. This verse has been credited to his disciple known as Anandagiri. And he said that when proper spiritual means are practiced and one gains the knowledge, the aspirant is not afraid even of death. As you know, the three practices are recommended for devotee spiritual unfoldment are knowledge, devotion, and action, and symbolically described and represented in this verse. Bhagavad-Gita is a knowledge pursued at the level of intellect. Gita offers both the vision of life and the way of life, goal of life, and also the path followed in order to accomplish that goal, both Brahma Vidya and Yoga Shastra, for the knowledge of Brahman and methodology to accomplish this. That's my favorite scripture. Bhakti or devotion is the second requirement in one's spiritual pursuit. Sipping water of Ganges represents a devotion. The Ganges represents pilgrimage to the sacred centers along the Ganges and living the life of austerity and penance. But for that matter, all sacred centers can be considered as the representation in that statement. The third aspect is the spiritual aspect of the process of karma, action. The worship of the Lord represents action. Performing archana, where one prays, carries out several rituals, including flowers and prasada. But the key is having understood the whole topic to make every action in our life to be considered as a worship to Lord. For example, when Kumud and myself practiced medicine, every person, every patient that we were working with, for us, we were serving God. And where we are able to see that divinity in every individual, even though you're exhausted in the evening, you feel very happy about it because you had the privilege to serve Lord, to the archana the whole day. So that's the way every action we do in the spirit of serving God. And you'll be amazed how much amount of peace one gets. Let's take one by one. Study of Bhagavad-Gita. Study of 700 verses from 18 chapters of Gita is the ultimate nectar from all the scriptures combined. Each verse is a gem, and complete understanding of even a few of them reveals to us ultimate secrets to reach the ultimate goal of human existence. As a matter of fact, anytime that we had faced challenges of life, and trust me, both Kumar and myself have faced many. But again, going back to Bhagavad Gita and reading about 10 verses in a row, doesn't matter what chapter it was, trying to analyze them in your own mind, reflecting on them, we found the answer for it. So to me, Bhagavad Gita is the ultimate scripture in our personal life. One needs to read that and listen to divine song over and over again. And if you're lucky enough, as we have been, read and listen to the commentaries by the scholars called Shravana. And we reflect those lessons heard in your mind through meditations, manana, and then apply them in daily life, and you feel your personality gradually change and transform yourself. And that, as Professor Rambachan described to us as nididhyasana. And what happens is, by good fortune, at that time the Guru appears in your life. And Durlapam Tremai Vedat Manushyatvam Mumukshatvam Mahapurush Savsaya. So you don't find the Guru. When you are ready, you'll be amazed how the Guru appears in front of your life. And both of us feel blessed that we had the privilege to study for about, not as long as Professor Rambachan has studied from 85 onwards till the time he passed away 30 years later, Swami Dayananda. So that's how I talked about. First was study of Bhagavad Gita. The second thing he described was sipping a drop of Ganges water could be taken literally of Ganges water. I think, but we can even understand even better if we take that Ganga Jala Kanika Pita is, take it metaphorically. Here Ganga stands for eternal river of knowledge of the self. It has descended down directly from Lord Shiva, the first teacher situated on Mount Kailas. Akash Ganga then stands for the heavenly flow of spiritual knowledge passed on through the generations of enlightened teachers, with the Shankaracharya in the middle, till the time it reaches down to us through our own teacher of Guru, for us, Swami Dayananda. Sadashiva Samarambhat, Shankaracharya Madhyamam, Asmat Acharya Paryantam, Vande Guru Paramparam. So that single drop of spiritual knowledge that comes from the Guru lets the devotee get a flicker of joyous vision of the distant goal of perpetual bliss, and over a period of time, that becomes a part of your personality. That, as a matter of fact, when you see that little first flicker of that joyous vision, we can consider that as a fleeting light that one sees on the lighthouse when you are on a ship and trying to find a safe harbor. But that allows the pilot of that ship to know that that individual is on the right track and that a safe harbor is just around the corner. However, one still needs a pilot ship, like an enlightened guru, who can direct the ship through a narrow, proper passage to the ultimate safety of the harbor. So that's for that. You need treatment. Number 3, we always talk about treatment. 3 medicines. Worship of Murari. Murari is the demon that Lord Sri Krishna killed. At the same time, metaphorically, you can call demon of Mura could be considered one's ego or all the weaknesses of our human mind. Unless those are taken care of, completely annihilated, there is no hope whatsoever into entering into the harbor of truth and wisdom, the glorious state, the immaculate and everlasting peace. So naturally, once you have understood what your true nature is, such an enlightened person is not even concerned about God of death. Yama does not dare to question him and such seeker does not care any longer to question the phenomenon of death. He has already conquered the death. He knows his identity is Satchit Ananda, meaning awareness that always exists, immortal, and always overflowing with happiness, joy, and contentment. The final verse I thought you should review this morning is Punarapi Jananam, Punarapi Maranam, Punarapi Janani Jathare Shayanam. Here is Iya Samsare, Bhudustare, Krupaya Pare, Pahi Murare, Bhajagovindam, Bhajagovindam. Punarapi Jananam, once again, human birth. Punarapi Maranam, death once again. Punarapi Janani Jathare Shayanam, once again lying in the mother's womb. Iya Samsare, Bhudustare, here in the Sansara, which is hard to cross. Krupaya apare pai morari. Through your infinite kindness, O destroyer of Mura, save from this samsara, which seems to have no end, apare. The unending cycle of birth, growth, decay, disease, and death, and rebirth is for the jiva caught into a never-ending desires and vasanas, which continue to perturb the individual, leading to seek fresh fields of experiences repeatedly. Only way to address this is getting the existing vasanas reduced, if not completely eliminated. When we live as human beings, we tend to get attached to our material possessions, individual body, mind, sense complex, our friends and family. And hence we don't ever want to die or get away from the world anytime. Unfortunately, we do not realize that in reality, our true nature is so divine and complete This attachment, this mortal existence, is simply due to our ignorance of our true nature. And that ignorance prompts us to come back and again to find the immortality and perpetual happiness, not recognizing that exactly is our true nature. Samsara is a painful cyclic process of birth, growth, decay, disease, death, old age, and ultimately death. Remember, if we just look at our own life, our life's journey is painful. Just imagine, you can't understand it, but as a physician, we can see when you help the baby is being born, birth is not a easy process, both for the mother as well as the child, so that is painful. Growing the child is painful process, and young adulthood is challenging itself. I don't need to remind you about the life challenges as a samsari. And having worked in the hospital, we know the number of diseases that even adults have to face. And as we reach my age, no one needs to be reminded about the pain and suffering as we get older and suffer with various ailments, and ultimately culminating in death, which is also pain. Or Guruji Swami Dayananda describes the nature of life in this fashion. He says, Dukkham, dukkham, sukham, dukkham, dukkham. He said, a little bit of pleasure preceded by a lot of pain and followed by a lot of pain. And of course, he said, if there were not even that little pleasure, we won't be able to survive at all. That looks painful, but it's a very interesting story in Yoga Vasishta that illustrates this very point. Sure, you have heard it before, but I'll repeat it just for the sake of it because it makes the point well. A man was being chased by a tiger and he was running for his dear life. He finally found a well, and not having any other options because he was going to be bakra, otherwise the tiger was going to jump on him. He jumped into that well. Fortunately for him, some roots of the adjacent huge tree had entered into the wall of the well in the middle. So there were still hanging in between. So he could hang on to it and did not fall down completely. As he hung there, he smiled and looked up. But what he saw was good old tiger. When he looked down, he saw a snake at the bottom of the dry well waiting for him. Then he observed two rats were gnawing, chewing out the very roots that he was hanging on to. Everything challenging, difficult to deal with. But no, there was a honeycomb at the top of the well, from which honey was dripping slowly. So what this guy does is he stretches out so he will be able to catch a few drops of honey in his mouth. A perfect story for a human being living this samsara without recognizing what his true nature is. And what he's saying as a treatment is, here samsare bahu dustare, here in this samsara, which is difficult to cross. Our life cycles and samsara are considered vast and difficult to cross, just like a huge and boundless ocean is. There should be only one option to ask for the help. Come and help me, God, and do that through the prayers. Krupaya apare pahi mohare, pahi pahi murare. Through infinite kindness, O destroyer of Mura, save from samsara, which seems to have no end at all. Now here, of course, God referred to his Lord Sri Krishna, who destroyed the demon called Mura. But realistically, Mura can be, as I mentioned earlier, stand for our inner enemies such as Kama, Krodha, Lobha, Moha, Mada, and Matsarya. Lust, anger, greed, delusion, arrogance, and jealousy. When these enemies rule our heart and mind, there is no place for God in it. And many such stories are present in the Puranas about gods and demons, Sura and Asura. When the demons win, that means these enemies overtake our good tendencies, they run to Lord seeking the help and intervention so they would be protected. And sure, once again, Lord comes to help and Surah come back again victorious. So only recourse for these, our human beings, our human being is prayers to overcome original enemies. Now, to that story is Gajendra Moksha is a perfect illustrative story. There's a great elephant devotee called Gajendra who was playing in the waters when a crocodile got hold of his leg and started pulling Gajendra deep in the water. Crocodile is called Graha in Sanskrit. Despite his strong efforts, he was gradually getting weaker and losing the battle. So what he did, he called out for Lord, "Hey Govinda, please come and save me." As soon as he uttered the word Govinda, Lord Vishnu appeared on air Garuda, his vehicle Garuda, and killed the crocodile with his Sudarshan Chakra and saved him. Here in this verse of the disciple of Sri Shankara, he is screaming for such kind help from God and concludes that very verse saying, Bhajagovindam, Bhajagovindam. As a matter of fact, if you remember, Shri Krishna describes in the 16th verse, 7th chapter, people given to good actions, good people, who worship me are fourfold. Who are those? The distressed, like Gajendra was, the seekers of security and pleasure, the one who desires to know me, and most importantly, the one who knows me. Chaturvida bhajante man, jana sukrito arjuna, janaha sukritir arjuna, sukrinaha arjuna, arto jinyasuhu artharthi jnani cha bharatarshibha. So the key for us as true devotee is to pray regularly to the God of your heart. In this case, he's describing Krishna, the Murari, who through divine grace easily uplifts the devotee. This comes about, as we have mentioned earlier, by devotee's self-effort of study and making our mind tranquil by overcoming our attachments and aversions, talking about raga dvesha. The tranquil mind becomes objective. Then only it's able to understand exactly what the scriptures are telling us. Until then and then, whatever we hear, whatever we read, is processed by mind, which is distorted by raga dveshas, likes and dislikes. When those distractions are no longer there, the mind is able to appreciate the unfoldment of the vision in the scriptures. Our mind understands very clearly what the scriptures reveal. One slowly develops the abidance in that knowledge. Our mind, antakaran, goes through the process of hearing, carefully reflecting, and finally transforming into a positive direction, coming to know what our true nature is, and then succeed in crossing this challenging journey on this vast ocean of samsara with full confidence. I'll stop right here because there are 4 solid, heavy, knowledge-laden verses by these bright disciples of Shankaracharya.
Clearly, we and both of us, we have talked about this before, that the Bhajagovindam is a text, at least the first section of it, attributed to Shankara, that seeks to, aims to, to draw the listener into what I would regard as, the 4th stage of life. He was a sannyasin, all of his disciples were sannyasin. The poem is written, for the person perhaps who is contemplating or considering sannyasa in the traditionally understood sense. So we have the description of the person who lives under a tree, wearing minimal attire, depending on others for providing his or her food and essential requirements. I think that what our situation, when I try to translate a text like this into our contemporary situation, as Hindus or as others, this is the question that I ask myself and I'm raising. Most of the teachers of the Vedanta tradition, including texts like Bhajagovindam, I mean, you are an exception, like I'm saying. The teachers are sannyasins, but most of those who are studying and listening and seeking to practice are not. In your case, you are your teaching is, you come from a very different tradition of teaching, which I would say is much more like the very ancient. It is not that it's without precedent. We have the ancient tradition of the Upanishadic teachers who were grihasthas and lived in family context, and they were teachers also. That's the tradition that we find ourselves in. So there is authority and precedent for teachers like you in our tradition. So I think that as we read a text like this, we have to make the distinction, as you are trying to do. I think is important. I'm just lifting it up, between sannyasa as a literal entry into the fourth stage of life, where one, and it was a very radical step. One cut all ties to family. One cut all, one sees, in fact, one was, the expression used in the Bhagavad-Gita is niragni. The sannyasi is niragni, where it means, the traditional grihastha will perform the agnihotra and all of the rituals. So one gave up all religious rituals, traditions of worship, cut family ties, cut ties to community, took on a new name, performed one's own death ceremony, and became a sannyasa. Few of us will do that. The question is, for those of us who do not think of sannyasa in this literal way, or to enter into the part of the fourth stage, are we living a lesser? Are we committed to a lower ideal? Are we falling short of what the ideal and the aspiration ought to be? And I want to say no to that. I want to say no to that. And I want to say no on the basis of the fact that I do think, even though, some of the readers and commentators on the Bhagavad-Gita will disagree with me on this, but I would state my own reading of the text boldly, Shashi.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Many of the commentators on the Bhagavad-Gita, as you know so well, will say that Krishna was urging Arjuna to engage in the battle of Kurukshetra because Arjuna was not yet qualified for sannyasa.
Not at all.
And that's what some teachers say. I am very much aware of that.
Yeah.
I would say that that's not a proper reading of the text. I think Krishna was teaching Arjuna that there's a way to be engaged in the world and also to do it in a very deeply spiritual way. It's an equal ideal. It's not a lesser ideal. And we can turn to so many of the verses in the Bhagavad-Gita that you have already commented upon. Gyeyam sanitya sannyasi yona dveshti na kankshati nirmando hi mahabaho sukham bandham pramuchyate. Or even better than that one, Shashi, is anasrita karma phalam karya sa sannyasi
Yeah.
na yogi na niragnir na cha akriyat. So that he's redefining, I think in the Bhagavad-Gita, he's redefining sannyasa as an inward state, as an attitude to life that is possible for those of us who are immersed and engaged in the world. And so my last point is that, you have the verse that you commented upon today, which is a really interesting verse, again, by another sannyasin disciple, punarapi jananam, punarapi
Narapi Maranam, yeah.
Pranapi janani jatare shayanam. So, we can think of samsara in two ways. Samsara literally as the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, or samsara as an attitude to the world from which we should be free. Because keeping in mind that the Vedanta tradition does not understand liberation, because we put it in a different way, because we emphasize the ideal of Jivan Mukta, liberation in this world. Liberation for us is not escape from the world. It is a different way of being in the world. It is not a life from the world, turning away from the world, but a different way of being in the world. So samsara is not the world, but samsara is a particular perspective in the world that is conditioned by ignorance. And moksha is not life away from the world, but moksha is life in the world by a different perspective. That's all I wanted to add, Shashi, to your beautiful exposition of these 4 verses this morning.
Anand, thank you very much for that. As a matter of fact, your point is well made. I think it's the attitude that has to be changed, and you're able to use that properly understood, modified, refined attitude to enjoy this life, knowing fully who you are.
Yeah.
One other thing which is kind of interesting to you to consider, Anant, is how about this being a subject matter for your next book, taking out these verses together and making a comment about sannyasi as you see it from Gita. What do you think, Anant?
I like this suggestion very much, Shashi, because thinking of the Hindu tradition as a whole, I think the future of the Hindu tradition in an exposition of its spirituality that allows us to be fully engaged in the world while also being deeply faithful to its ideals. It's not turning away from the world, but engaging the world from these deep places of meaning. And I think there's always there's good room for offering interpretations and commentaries. You and Kumudji, you have both lived, very active lives in the world, right? Amazing lives in the world, and you're still very, very active. But it doesn't mean that your engagement in the world somehow makes your deep commitment to the ideals of the Hindu tradition somehow lesser.
Well, if you want to write on it, I'll be really happy to join you. Thanks, Anant.
Well, we have examples. You mentioned this, when Sri Krishna upholds the example of Janaka.
Yeah, exactly.
Janaka, who was, he goes, is very politically active. We speak about political engagement, Nayana and others are here who are very politically engaged. Janaka was a politically engaged leader, and Sri Krishna commends him, because he was committed to the common good, Loka Sangra. And he says, look at people like Janaka. They are very much engaged in the world. He was not saying that the ideal of Janaka is a lesser ideal. It's an alternative ideal. And this is not to put down, as you said, the traditional sannyasa,
No.
but also not to put down those who are engaged and immersed in the world.
As a matter of fact, if you remember, Shuka's guru was considered Janaka. Vyasa said you have to get the blessing from him. So, Prasanna, you have any comments?
See, I think Anant made a very good point. From what I gathered from today's talk and last talk, let me summarize my understanding. You said we have to be patient. We should dedicate our actions to God. We should devote ourselves to God. We should engage in service of mankind. We should contemplate on the self as much as we possibly can, and we constantly study the scriptures and reflect on the teachings. These are the ideas that I got from your talk this time and the last time.
Well, thank you, Prasanna. I think we learn from each other. As a matter of fact, Acharyat Padamadhatya, you learn 1/4 only from the Guruji. From 1/4 you get from the so brahmachari around you. 1/4 you learn from your own studies, and of course, in your lifetime you learn the remaining fourth. So I think we are blessed to have a community like this, and we enjoy learning from one another. Thank you, Prasanna. I really appreciate it. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, namaste. I just wanted to get some comments on something that's always kind of given me a little trouble since I was a little boy, which is that the whole notion of living from an infinite past. So you've always lived, and yet you have not achieved liberation up to now. It makes me feel like, what are the odds of you attaining it in the future if you've lived infinitely into the past, and up to now you haven't achieved it? That's one. And the other thing that I came across recently on social media was a question where someone was asking if maturity is just the loss of passion. And I'm wondering, and because when it's put like that, it seems like the loss of passion, being unattached and so on, seems like a bad thing almost, especially in the way we understand the world nowadays. If I can just get some comments on those two aspects, if you understand.
I understand what you're saying. Let me take one thing at a time. When we talk about rebirth, because certain missions are unfulfilled, because we find that as we are in life, we are unhappy because something is missing in our life. So whatever we do in our life is to become something different than who you are to find that happiness. Getting new clothes, getting special food, but finding a better job, earning more money, having a better home. Those are some of the things I just gave an example where makes you feel good, and momentarily that feels good. But unfortunately, as we discussed this morning briefly, during those times when you achieve those specific goals, during that moment of receiving that specific award or specific goal that you reach, your mind is so fulfilled and happy that you don't have any other desire at that time. So what happens is your true nature shows through. What we need to understand is, another example you can give is, our nature is like a bright shining sun in the skies. The clouds of desire come and obliterate it, and the sun's brightness is no longer there. When that desire is fulfilled, that means that cloud has moved away. What shows through is the bright sun, your true nature that shines through. We misinterpret that receiving that specific object is something that is making you something special. That is our understanding. So during that time, as we discussed this morning, that is the viraga. That means you have no specific requirement at that time, and you are at peace, and you're connecting with yourself. So once you realize that who you are, Satchidananda, awareness, as Professor Rambachan has taught so many times, and his teaching is still, which is always present, that makes it immortal, and is always overflowing or limitless and overflowing with joy and happiness. What else you want, really? And once you realize it and live in that particular spirit in our life, then you're not concerned about death at all, because you realize that Professor Rambachan has been teaching us, I'm not this body, I'm not this mind, I'm not this intellect. You understand? So I'm not even all the entities that creates my body. I'm basically Chidananda Rupam. So basically, once you understand that, there's nothing to come back for. And you talked about passion was the second point that you're trying to ask question. I think we need to have a passion, of course. But a passion has to be directed to having a specific goal to reach that specific ultimate goal that you have. So unless you have a passionate attitude to reach that goal. So when I said you have Shraddha, you have passion to persist to pursue that goal. So that start with a faith, have Shraddha, but don't settle with blind faith. Not just because your teacher is telling you or parents are telling you. Till the time you have conviction that yes, indeed, what my father was telling me or my teacher was telling me is indeed true, that becomes complete. In order to reach that ultimate goal, you still need the passion. Am I making it clear? Thank you. Any other questions?
Can I just add something quickly to Rishi's question? I mean, just a bit, just where you just stop. Rishi, I think that sometimes the ideal of freedom from passion is also described in ways that seems to be detached to the point of indifference. And I just want to cite, the Bhagavad-Gita verse again. Is a very famous line. Dharma aviruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. I am passion that is not in contradiction to dharma. So as Shashi said, passion is necessary, passion is important. But I just want to add, the only qualification, or the important qualification about passion and commitment to something is that commitment should be in harmony with virtue, with ethics. Whether it's the passion of a political leader, the passion of a business entrepreneur, or passion of a teacher, or whatever kind of passion it is. It's necessaries. It goes to the heart of motivation, and but we should also always ensure that it is in harmony with dharma, which means the passion does not cause suffering. It does not impede the common good. I think that's what dharma means.
Thanks, Anand. Appreciate your comment greatly.
An old lady who's worked hard all of her life and lived in India. And, she decided one day that it was time for her to become a sannyasi because she wanted to fulfill the mission. And every time she started to go towards Kashi or wherever with her little bundle of clothes, she would say, oh my gosh, I haven't cooked the rice. Or although she had a son and daughter-in-law who could take up all of these things, she just couldn't get the foot out the door because she was trapped by all of these material things, her responsibilities, and she felt everything on her shoulder. But her really great desire was to go away and fulfill the sannyasi part. And at that time, we kind of made fun of that poor lady. But isn't that true of all of us? We really want to be doing more, and we want to become sort of that state of mind of sannyas. However, we are trapped by all of our responsibilities, and we cannot just move off. And it's not our time to take sannyas, maybe in the next janma. But anyway, that has always kind of intrigued me, that, you want to go through all the phases of life, and yet, we're bound to this earth and our responsibilities and our dharma and our duties and whatnot. So therefore, it's just a comment. Maybe you could all explain what it's all about. You did a good job already, all three of you.
No, I think, Naina, I think you don't have to be a sannyasi. You can change your attitude, as you were discussing this morning. So your thinking is properly channeled in the right direction. So it doesn't matter where you are. When you're in the house, outside the house, in the temple, underneath the tree, you are at peace yourself. So that specific process of getting out of the house is really immaterial. But understanding, clear thinking is the most important part of it. Okay.
Okay, thanks.